Well, as you can see, the move into new brewing accommodation has not happened yet. So the progress with the house move has been somewhat glacial, shall we say. And we obviously haven't progressed with that as far as we were hoping by this point. So anyway, because of that, I did eventually get to the point where I was needing to brew some more beer. And my consumption levels had gone down a little bit since the new babies arrived, because drinking and sleep deprivation don't really work out very well for me. I'm sure that doesn't work out very well for other people either. But I've eventually got to the point where I did need to make some beer, and there wasn't any prospect on the immediate horizon anyway of the house move and completion date coming up. So I thought I'd better get something brewed up. And with Christmas on the way as well, I was thinking I wanted to do something that was maybe a little bit not festive, but a kind of, beer for the festive season, at least, which would be a festive beer. But anyway, but it also needed to be something that was fairly quick turnaround. So a lot of, festive beers or Christmas beers you tend to associate with big, high ABV kind of darker beers or spiced ales, that sort of thing. But I wanted something that would be done in a few weeks and good to drink. So it's occurred to me that I'd been fancying doing a Dunkelweiss or a dark wheat beer for some time. I tried one by Yeasty Boys a little while ago. I think I might have actually put it in one of the videos, possibly a few weeks or months back. And I really enjoyed it. And I've never brewed a Dunkelweiss beer. I've brewed quite a few normal wheat beers, but never a Dunkelweiss. So it's basically a wheat beer, but with some dark malts in it, a bit of caramel malt, and yeah, so it gives you a darker beer, more of a rich kind of malty, bready kind of backbone to the flavour, but otherwise a lot of the usual kind of characteristics of a wheat beer or a Weiss beer, like the banana and kind of clove flavours. So that's what I decided to brew, and that's what this video is about. So yeah, let's get on with the brewing. Okay, so let me just quickly discuss the style of this beer. So the Dunkelweiss or Dunkelweiss beer, which is the dark German wheat beer. It's not a massively common style, so some of you might not be too familiar with it. But essentially, as I said before, just think of a normal kind of German wheat beer, but with some darker grains in it and some dark caramel malt. So it's not a really dark beer, but it's somewhere between kind of what I guess you would say colour-wise, kind of an amber and a brown ale in terms of the colour. But because with wheat beers it's usually fairly hazy and opaque, they can look a little bit darker than what the actual kind of colour of the wort itself actually is when you're brewing it. So in terms of your numbers for these, they're normally around about 4.5 to 5.5%, so not massively high in alcohol, but you can brew them up to a sort of fairly premium strength, I suppose. Usual low bitterness that you would have with a wheat beer, and a medium-ish sort of finishing gravity, so sort of 10-10 to 10-14. The flavour profile, as with normal wheat beers, you get phenols and esters of kind of clove and banana. In good examples, they're supposed to be fairly balanced between the two, but with the darker Dunkelweiss, you want some of that malt character coming through as well. So they'll typically be using German malts like Munich, as well as wheat, obviously, and maybe some Cara Munich, and also the kind of caramelized or darker wheat malts. So the wheat speciality malts, like you can use, I guess, kind of midnight wheat or Cara wheat and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's what you're kind of looking at normally for it. There shouldn't really be much in the way of hop flavor there. It's very much a yeast driven beer. So it's all about the kind of yeast flavors with the malts in this case to give you a fairly nice kind of bready, rich, slightly caramelly malt base with the banana and the clove kind of yeasty flavors dancing over the top of that a little bit. So yeah, that's the kind of style profile as it's given. I'll go through my recipe now and talk to you about how I've kind of ignored some of those kind of standards for it, not in a major way, but just a few ingredient choices which were a bit different on mine because of what I had available and so on. But it's in the spirit of the style guidelines anyway, at least. So yeah, let's have a look at the recipe for the beer. So the name of my beer is Dunkelweiss, which I've shamelessly ripped off from a Witchwood beer, which I'm pretty sure they made a few years back. I don't know if it's still available at the moment, but it's usually a seasonal dunkel that they bring out around Halloween, I imagine. So yeah, nick the name from that because I like the name, and obviously it fits quite well with this beer style in terms of the name and everything. So in my grist, I've gone with 2.5 kilos of wheat malt, 1.2 kilos of standard Munich malt, 1 kilo of dark Munich malt. I've then got 200 grams of crystal malt. So I've gone for kind of medium crystal, which is about 60 Lovibond or 120 EBC. This is just standard kind of English crystal malt that I've used. As I said, in the style guidelines, if you're going to stick really traditional, you might want to go with a German Munich, a German Cara Munich or something like that, if you're going to use a crystal malt, or you could use crystal wheat instead. Now, this is one of the things that's gone slightly left field in terms of the recipe, which is using, as well as the standard crystal malt, I'm putting a little bit of crystal rye in there. I really like crystal rye malt, and it gives you a lot of colour and flavour, but without too much of a kind of cloying sweetness that you can get from normal crystal malts. So rather than putting in all crystal malt, I've done a split between the crystal 120 and the crystal rye malt. So I've got 200 grams of each of those, which is in total about 8% of the grist. And then last of all, just to adjust the colour up a little bit, I've got some pale chocolate, only about 80 grams of that. I thought that the pale chocolate malt is not going to have too much of an effect on the flavour, especially in such a small quantity. And if it does, it's going to bring some very light kind of roasty flavours and nuttiness, which won't necessarily be too much of a problem. You're not supposed to have roasted flavours in there, but again, that's why I've gone with a pale chocolate for that, because I don't have any Carafa Special, which is the darker malts that you would tend to use when you're looking for colour, but without any of that flavour. Or again, you could have used a midnight wheat or something like that in this case, but I didn't have that, so that's why I've got a few of these kind of not slightly non-traditional grains in there. Bittering wise, for the hops, I've gone with 12 grams of Green Bullet, which is a New Zealand hop. Again, you wouldn't normally expect to see that in a German wheat beer, but Green Bullet, along with a lot of New Zealand hops, has its heritage in traditional noble varieties. So if you look at the suggested substitutions for Green Bullet, a lot of them are actually German noble hops. So it's not going to be too far off of those. And it's in the boil at 60 minutes, so you're not really going to notice much of a difference in flavour, to be honest, as far as I'm concerned. That's really only going to bring the bitterness and not a lot else to the party. So I was using those because I had a packet of whole Green Bullet that I picked up at BrewCon quite a while back that I wanted to start using. So I thought, why not just throw them in for bittering on this, because they are a bittering hop by nature. Anyway, so that's the grist and the hops covered. Yeast wise, I was going with Mangrove Jack's M20. Haven't used that for a while, but it's always been a fairly good, reliable yeast for me in terms of wheat beers, and can give you quite a nice balance between the banana and the clove flavours without too much problem. Fermenting it at 21.5 degrees, which is supposedly the magic fermentation number for that yeast, according to my friend Chris. There's a podcast all about wheat beers where he talks about this yeast and a few others as well, if you go and check out the hop edition. So just a little plug for that there. And that's about it. Water wise, I was going for a fairly soft water profile, so I did use RO water, and then I added enough gypsum and calcium chloride to that to give me about 55 calcium, 12 ppm sodium, 83 chloride and 43 of sulfate, which works out about a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of the chloride, which is something that you look for with more maltier styles. So I thought that would fit quite well with a Dunkelweiss, because obviously looking for a lot of character from those malts to come through, and there's not really any hop flavour as such with it, so it made sense to me at least that would be a good profile to go for. I don't know if that's kind of a typical one that people use for this type of beer, but it's certainly something that I would probably use in other wheat beers as well, so that should work okay. The only other thing to mention, I think, is the mash temperature. So I was going for a fairly high mash temperature on this because I wanted it to be quite a full-bodied beer, so I like these darker sort of wheat beers to have quite a lot of chewiness to them, and I thought the higher mash temperature would help with that. So final numbers for a 20-litre batch, we should be coming out at around 5.4% on the final ABV from an OG of about 1058, which should ferment down to about 1017. EBC around 33.5 and 17 IBUs, so pretty minimal bitterness. Nice sort of mid amber to brown colour there, and hopefully a nice rich, chewy, dark wheat beer at the end of it. So that's it for the recipe and everything. Let's get into a bit of brew footage and then hopefully some tasting at the end. Right then, there we have the finished result. Now, I don't think amber or brown beers which are hazy are ever going to be the most attractive in the glass, because they do always have a little bit of that element of, kind of dishwater appearance to them. But having said that, that still looks like a fine looking pint to me. You can't go wrong with the old Erdinger glass for presenting a wheat beer, in my opinion, and that just helps to make it look the part really. Nice frothy cap on the top of it, and a dark amber brownish colour to it. Before I get into tasting and trying out the beer, I must talk a little bit about the numbers on this one, because they were all over the shop. Basically, I think the amount of time that I'd not been brewing for, I didn't really factor in a few things with this beer that I should have, particular to wheat beers, I think. So first of all, I always tend to see a little bit of a reduction in efficiency anyway when I'm brewing a beer with this much wheat in the grist. So probably about 5%, maybe less than what I normally would get. maybe because the grist doesn't drain as well or filter through quite as easily, perhaps. But anyway, I didn't factor that in, so my efficiency was down a bit anyway. I also didn't factor in that the low amount of hops in this beer meant that there was a lot less absorption of the wort, so I ended up quite a bit over volume as well. My idea about having to mash a little bit higher, for some reason I had it in my head that the M20 yeast ferments down or attenuates a lot more than is stated on the packet, but that isn't really the case. I think it is genuinely a sort of medium to low kind of attenuation yeast. So it finished higher than it was supposed to as well. It ended up at 10.19. All of these things together basically meant I ended up with a lower OG, a higher FG, and the final ABV was nearly a whole % less than it was targeted at. So it's ended up at about 4.5%, which isn't a problem. And I don't think the beers particularly suffered for that, but the numbers were just a bit all over the place because I don't think my thought process with some of the decisions with the brewing and some of the preparation of the recipe were quite right. So I should have probably allowed for less losses because of the low amount of hops in there through the absorption, lowered my overall efficiency expectations, and not bothered with the higher temperature mash for this because it would have probably finished at about the right FG if I'd just left it at sort of 66, 65 even probably. So yeah, didn't quite hit the numbers, but I'm not massively upset about that. I would have maybe liked a slightly higher strength because, as I said, it's it's supposed to be a beer for Christmas, and you like your Christmas beers to be a little bit indulgent, maybe strength-wise, and this is more sort of session strength now. However, it's still quite a full, moorish kind of beer, and to me at least, it's still quite kind of Christmassy in terms of the flavour. So I did talk a bit at the beginning about this being a beer for Christmas. The reason I think that Dunkelweiss is quite a nice Christmas beer is they have that kind of rich malty flavour in terms of the grist, and there's a little bit of spice in there as well, so you get that slight clovey thing. So to me at least, I always get a little bit of a kind of Christmassy vibe off of the flavour profile of these beers, and I think it's a slight, taste-wise, it seems like a slightly indulgent kind of rich beer to my palate anyway, and that kind of fits the kind of Christmas bill for me. Anyway, enough chat about that. Let's get into the beer. The head is still sticking around. It's not quite as thick and frothy as it was a minute ago, but I have just been talking for about 5 minutes. So we've got decent levels of carbonation on it. This is still very fresh. It's only probably about 3 weeks since I've brewed it. As with other wheat beers, I think you can turn them around and have them ready to drink in that sort of time frame quite easily. So it's definitely good for a quick turnaround. You might think with the darker malts in it that it might need a little bit longer to condition, but I don't think that's really too much of an issue with these either. So on the nose, we have got probably the banana, and a little bit of spiciness is the first thing that you pick up, but there is definitely the malt sweetness there as well. So a bit of a kind of caramel aroma there, and just a general kind of malty sweetness. There's a little bit of a sort of hint of almost banoffee pie to this one, with that kind of banana and caramel aroma coming together. So it does kind of put that into your mind a little bit. Let's give it a taster. That carries on into the flavour as well. So quite sweet initially, fairly rich. The definitely a good body to this, even though it's not as strong as it was supposed to be. So 4.5%, it still tastes like quite a, rich, full-bodied pint. Definite caramel there. The banana flavour from the yeast. Cloviness. There's maybe a little bit of spice to it, but not massively, which is not a problem for me at all. I'm not a huge fan of the kind of clove flavour anyway. The banana's not overpowering either though, so there is a bit of balance there between the two. And yeah, overall just a very easy to drink, quite moorish, very kind of biscuity, malty, sweet, but with those yeasty esters really being the kind of main thing that you're getting there flavor-wise, I think. I'm pretty happy with that. Like I said, although it didn't quite hit the numbers that were expected, flavor-wise, that's pretty much what I was hoping for, to be honest. So I'm happy with this beer. I'm not sure, apart from changing my brew day planning and recipe slightly to try and get the numbers closer to where they were supposed to be, I'm not sure what else I would change with this. Perhaps try a different yeast. I think I would maybe like a little bit more prominence with the banana flavor, maybe get a bit more banana and bubblegum kind of esters coming out of this. That's just my preference. I kind of like wheat beers that lean a little bit more towards that rather than being balanced between the clove or the banana, or being more towards the clove. So, I mean, I say try a different yeast. I could just try tweaking the temperature for the fermentation on this. Possibly, not sure whether you would want to drop it or go higher to get more banana, but that would be something to experiment with. Or try a different yeast that's maybe more pronounced with the banana esters. I know that the CML Crystal Weissen yeast is really punchy in terms of the banana and bubblegum kind of ester, so that might be a good one to try out to get that. But yeah, there's the Dunkelweiss. Pretty good. Cheers.
I'm the dude, so that's what you call me, you know? That or his dudeness, or duder, or, you know, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.